Anal sex, oral sex, how to choke your partner safely, gender unicorns, and the existence of more than 100 genders. These are just some of the topics apparently being taught in some of our schools. The issue was given prominence earlier this week following the request for a review of RSHE by Miriam Cates, the Conservative MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge and a former science teacher, and Miriam has been supported by some 50 other MPs. The unions immediately replied that it is only a very small percentage of schools that are guilty of such outrageous practices and have accused MPs of using this issue as a political football. So what are schools required to teach? Well, since 2020, all schools have been required to teach relationships education. Secondary schools have been required to teach relationships and sex education. Sex education remains optional for primary schools. In secondary schools, the statutory guidance is largely concerned with sexual health, contraception, STDs, safe and healthy relationships, both sexual and non-sexual. This guidance does stress that there are different types of committed, stable relationships. I've always argued for the professionalism of teachers to be respected and for there to be as little imposition from above as possible. The statutory guidance on RSE is actually quite good, though it is rather loose and permissive. One would hope that the requirement for age would be enough. As Stephen James, chairman of the Conservative Friends of Education, has said, the primary curriculum should be about multiplication tables and not masturbation. If, however, more prescriptive guidance is needed, then so be it. But as with all lessons, to be really effective, the teacher must have the freedom to adapt the lesson, both the content and the approach, to best suit each and every individual in each and every lesson. One size cannot fit all. Secondly, the role of Ofsted. According to the Daily Mail, Amanda Spielman, the head of Ofsted, has said that the inspectorate is powerless to intervene in this issue. Now, if that is true, and she did actually say that, it is utter nonsense. Ofsted inspectors are required to inspect the personal development of pupils. It's one of the 4 main areas that Ofsted inspects, and personal development includes RSE. This whole area was given a special focus and emphasis following the publication of Ofsted's report on sexual harassment in schools in 2021. What's more, underpinning every inspection is the evaluation of a school's safeguarding procedures. Now, if a primary school really is teaching about masturbation, surely that is a safeguarding and well-being issue. So the mechanics, the mechanisms for dealing with something like this already exist. But if Ofsted is genuinely more interested in curriculum maps and lesson sequences than the safety and welfare of children, then we do really have to question the purpose and future of Ofsted. Lastly, we come to what I think is the much more difficult issue. If schools really are teaching inappropriate sex lessons, they can be easily identified and stopped. But a much more difficult issue today to deal with is the teaching of gender. The big question is, are schools to reflect the society in which we live? In 2021, a non-binary passenger on an LNER train complained to the company because the conductor welcomed people on board with the greeting, "Ladies and gentlemen." LNER replied to the complainant saying that their staff should not be using language like this. TfL staff were told to drop "ladies and gentlemen" in favour of "good morning everyone" as early as 2017. So is it only a matter of time before a teacher is prosecuted for being discriminatory, for saying boys and girls? We must remember, of course, that gender is a protected characteristic under the 2010 Equality Act. and the statutory guidance on RSE accepts that we live in an increasingly complex world. We can't therefore be surprised to find that the LGBTQIA Resource Centre is producing resources for schools. How different from when I was at infant school in the early 1970s and we read books about Dick and Dora and their mum and dad, a white heterosexual middle-class family where Dick played with a football, Dora or Jane played with a doll, mum did the cooking and dad went to work and of course always drove the car. Today, schools would be utterly slated if they were still using such books. So where do schools stand? Are they expected to prepare students for life in 21st century Britain as demanded by the Ofsted framework? And if so, is the society of 21st century Britain a gender neutral society? This is not a decision to be made by individual schools. It's a decision for our elected representatives and indeed for society as a whole. But this decision, however, needs to be made urgently. Schools are still awaiting guidance on how to cater for trans pupils, guidance that was promised last year when Nadhim Zahawi was Secretary of State for Education. Schools that get this topic wrong must be called out. But equally, schools must be absolutely secure in knowing what is expected of them.